God doesn't say like, you can take 5 ideas from me and then you can take 5 ideas from somebody else. You can kind of mesh that in and see how that feels, if that kind of works for your life. And then you can go and do that. That's clearly not what he's calling. Hey guys, welcome back. So I don't know about you guys, but I feel like this is the easiest reading that we have had, I don't know, since back in Genesis. So I feel like we're in for a treat today. It's going to be short, sweet, to the point. And so if you have not been with me before, this is Bible 365. I'm your host, Kathy Carter. I'm reading through the Bible in 365 days, and I am using the chronological Bible reading plan from oneyearbibleonline.com, which is a downloadable free reading plan. So today's date is August 1st. It is day 214, and our reading is 2 Kings 23, 2 Chronicles 34:29 through 35, chapter 35, and then Nahum, the prophet Nahum. So here we are. We are in the kingdom where Josiah reigns. Josiah is the son of Amnon. Amnon is the son of Manasseh. Manasseh is the son of Hezekiah. Hezekiah at the time was a good king, but now I'm reading all this stuff and I'm thinking, how could he have been considered a good king when all of this stuff wasn't happening? So when we left off yesterday, it was Josiah had sort of taken over, right? And they had found the book of the law. So they had found the book of, and I'm going to say it's the law and the prophets, because some of the things that it doesn't say the law and the prophets. So I always want to be careful. But it says that there was, like, they were talking about destruction. And so that comes by way of the prophets. That actually doesn't come by way of like histories or Genesis or Exodus, things like that. So I'm thinking they found the law and the prophets, whichever ones, I'm not too sure, but it looks like they found the law, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and then some of the prophets. Again, it could have been like Hosea, it could have been Jonah, right? There were a couple that we found, and certainly like the Psalms, things like that. So here we are, and Josiah is king, and I think it says he's in his 18th year. So he's barely full grown. He's one of the ones who started really young. And so he's not that old, but he has discovered this book of the law. And he was like, oh my gosh, we were not following the Lord and we were going to get punished for it. So he was tearing his clothes. He was sad. And so he's like, we have to bring all of this back. And we have found that this is not the first time this has been done. So there's been at least one king who did this. And also David did this, right? When all the tribes came together. And there's this whole idea of just like bringing everyone back in to the house of the Lord, bringing everyone back to the temple, not just fixing the temple, but completely cleaning the temple, which requires a lot because the temple is pretty bad. And this is one of the things I wanted to note. So obviously he's removing the high places, which are not in the temple, right? They're in different areas. So he's removing some of the high places, right? And all the things that they follow up there. And it says, so just going to verse 1, it says, the king called together all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem. He went up to the temple of the Lord with the people of Judah, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the priests and prophets, all the people from least to greatest. He read in their hearing the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found in the temple of the Lord. This is how they have the covenant with the Lord, how the Lord has made the covenant with them, right? And the Lord, if you guys remember, if you were with me, and if you are not with me, if you're sort of just starting to join me, I start all the way back on January 1st. So if you like, share, and subscribe to this channel, well, you don't really need to share, but if you like it, subscribe to it, and then hit the notifications, you'll be able to find all of my videos. You'll be able to get all my videos. And I go all the way back to Genesis 1. And so you're going to see from the beginning all of the covenantal promises that God makes to these people. And this is what they're finding, right? They're no longer just going by traditions. Now they have actually found the word of the Lord, and they're starting to read from that. And it says, the king stood by the pillar and renewed this covenant in the presence of the Lord, so in the temple, and to follow the Lord and keep his commandments, statutes, and decrees with all his heart and all his soul, thus confirming the words of the covenant written in this book. And then all the people pledged as well. So the king is making this pledge. I read your covenant. I know what I need to do. I am going to do all those things with mind, body, and soul. I'm going to follow you completely, and I'm going to call all my people to do the same. I'm going to have them come to the temple, and in front of you, where you dwell, I'm going to have them promise to you that they are going to do these things. That's pretty big, right? Like, that's a pretty big commitment for the entire nation of Israel. And now, I've already mentioned this, and I know I mentioned it in some of my past videos when they did this. This is like a big upheaval for the people of Israel. So they have been living for generations, let's just put it that way, where they've had one foot in and one foot out. So they've recognized that they have this God that protects them, right? And that loves them and that picked them and plucked them up out of Egypt. But they also follow other gods. So they have this duality where they do both. And God is like, that is not what following me looks like. You can't follow me and follow anyone else. And just to dig in that a little bit, this whole idea of like, well, we're all kind of going in the same direction, right? So like you can pluck a little bit of this, pluck a little bit of that, pluck, right? God actually says, if you follow me, it's only me, right? You can't follow anyone else and say you're following me. If they were close, maybe God could say that. But the reality is God does not say that. God doesn't say like, you can take 5 ideas from me and then you can take 5 ideas from somebody else. You can kind of mesh that in and see how that feels, if that kind of works for your life. And then you can go and do that. That's clearly not what he's calling, right? He's clearly saying, and so, you know, these like ideas of like, you do you, which by the way, if you choose whatever path that you choose, that is completely your business and on you, right? But if you choose to follow the Lord of the Israelites, aka Jesus, right? Who comes down, or we're going to see later. If you choose to make that the God that you follow, you can't add in anybody else, right? Because adding in someone else actually takes away from him. You can't, and so you're only halfway in and you're halfway out, and you can't do both because other gods ask for other things, right? And God wants you wholly, completely part of his. And we're going to actually see that in Nahum, one of the things that he says. So, all right. So those people are turning away from, I'm half in and I'm half out. They're turning away. And now they're like, I'm wholeheartedly in. One of the things that they do, and again, this is something that's been noted before. One of the things they do is they're tearing down. He did away with the idolatrous priests. He tore down the high places, right? He took down the Asherah pole from the temple of the Lord in the Kidron Valley. So like, they have other things to worship. So like, and it's funny because as I say it, I'm thinking people would probably actually consider this a good thing. They have maybe like an area where they're like, oh, here's this God, and here's that God, and here's that God, and here's that God, and you guys can line up and like just kind of drop flowers wherever you want, right? Like just worship whatever one you want at a time. That's an offense to the Holy Lord. That's offensive because he's like, I'm me and I'm only me, and anybody else is underneath me, right? So that's offensive when they're treating them as if they are equal. So he says he's taken all those things down. And then this is the one I wanted to note in verse 7. He also tore down the quarters of the male shrine prostitutes. So in the temple, there seems to be housing for male prostitutes, and they were deeming this as something that was they were deeming this as something that was holy. Okay, that's what this seems to say. I want to say I looked up some historical things. That's what I love to do. I looked up some historical things, and the jury is out on whether people really did believe that it was following a religious thing, or if it was just people paying prostitutes, right? Like, were they just trying to work their way around paying prostitutes by calling it something that was holy? I don't know if any of that matters. The reality is there were males living in the temple, and those males were selling their bodies to women in order to impregnate these women. This was not happening in Rome. This was not happening in Greece. This was happening in the temple of the Lord. That is so opposite of anything that the Lord calls for marriage, like the sanctity of marriage. This would be considered defiling the bed, right? Like this would be terrible for relationships. He calls his people to either be clean and virginal, or he calls his people to be married. Those are, and I want to be very, very clear. To be single and virginal is as good as to be married, right? But to be single and be a prostitute was not the thing that he wanted for his people, right? Or to be out sowing your seed amongst, right, all the people. That's not what he wanted either. That wasn't his definition of maintaining a covenantal relationship. A covenantal relationship was either remaining clean and chaste or being in a marriage, right? Those were his two. Now, death, widowhood, like there were obviously things that happened in a broken world. These were his ideals for people, and they were making that unclean inside the temple. So he comes in and he tears all that down. Thank goodness. He desecrated Topheth in verse 10, which was the valley of Ben Hinnom, so no one could use it to sacrifice their son or daughter to the fire. Well, that's also really nice. So they were doing it to Moloch. He's removing all these other gods, right? They were doing it to, so they had these other gods. He said, just pulled down the altars that the kings of Judah had put up on the roof near Ahaz, the altars to Manasseh that he built to the temple of the Lord. So like every king who had built temples to these other gods, he's tearing all of those things down. It said, even the ones, there's still stuff from Solomon. And if you guys remember the last time there was some tearing apart, Solomon, they had kept Moses's serpent, and they were praying to Moses's serpent, the one that caused, the one that he stuck on a stake in order to heal people that were bit by snakes. And they were worshiping to that. And that was destroyed last time around. This time around, they kept, or they got rid of, King Solomon of Israel had built for Ashtaroth, the vile goddess of the Sidonians, for Chemosh, the vile god of Moab, and for Moloch, the detestable god of Ammon. And he had built Ashtoreths for them. And so he tore down all of those things as well. And then he sees tombs, and like he's burying things, he's burning things, he's putting bones on top of things, right? He's like, this is, once again, this is a complete wipeout and a complete cleansing. Then he sees a tombstone, and he says, and I think this is important, something that important to know. He sees a tombstone. He says, what tombstone do I see? And the people of the city said, it marks the tomb of a man of God. We don't have his name, from Judah, and pronounce this altar of Bethel, pronounced against it the very things that you have done. So someone came in and prophesied that these things were going to happen, and that was a tombstone. And he said, leave that one alone. Don't disturb the bones. And so they spared those bones and those of the prophet who had come from Samaria. I believe the prophet who had come from Samaria was Elisha. And I say that because if you go back, when he cures that man with leprosy, so Naaman was this guy with leprosy, and he was part of the kingdom back then, and his servant was an Israelite. And she said, oh, if only the prophet from Samaria could heal you. And actually he wound up healing him, right? So the guy went and found Elisha, and that was the one where he just went into the water and wound up cleaning himself and got healed of leprosy. So that, I believe, is the man of Samaria. I think that's what they would have understood as the man from Samaria. So it says, just as he had done in Bethel, Josiah removed all the shrines at the high places that the kings of Israel had built in the towns of Samaria, and that had aroused the Lord's anger. And then he goes back to Jerusalem. So I noted this whenever ago, but I want to note it again. Samaria is actually not in Judah. Samaria is north of Judah. And so I don't know how they got permission to go up into Judah and kind of clean all that out. I don't know if slowly but surely Judah spread a little bit. And so Samaria did become part of Judah, but it was part that was taken over by Assyria. So I'm not sure if they spread and they started owning that land, or if because it was Israelite, an Israelite temple that they were allowed to go up as Israelites and clean it out. And then they came back down to Jerusalem. I'm not sure, but I wanted to note it because if you're following along, the nation of Judah is the nation of Judah, right? And Samaria was sort of the capital of the nation of Israel. That's where the kings were. And so I think that it's important to note that he's going up in Samaria, and that doesn't seem to be their land. Okay, so going down to Chronicles, it says, as long as he lived, they did not fail to follow the Lord, the God of their ancestors. Then the king gives his order to all these people, celebrate Passover. They have not celebrated Passover in generations. Passover was all over the book of the Psalms. That should be one of the things that they were supposed to remember always. God said, remember this always, celebrate this every year so you remember what I did for you. This was sort of the original, like, this is how I paid the price for you. You were slaves in a nation that was not your own, and I chose you out of anything that I could choose in the entire world. I chose you. I plucked you up out of slavery, right? And I saved you. I redeemed you. I paid the price for your slavery, right? I paid that price, and then I brought you into a land that was not your own, that you did nothing to deserve. Like, this is the pinnacle. This is the picture of what God does for us. And they forgot, or at least maybe they had rumors about it, or maybe they heard about it, but they were not celebrating every year as they were supposed to. No wonder they turned from him. When you forget him, you turn from him. You don't know who he is anymore. You don't remember what he did for you. So of course, it's easy to turn into this different path because you don't remember who he is. And this is a shout out to all the people. Remember who your Lord is. Don't forget to read the book that he gave you so you know who it is. Don't forget to show up at services on Saturday or Sunday night or Friday night or Monday night, whatever it is that you go, right? Don't forget to hear God's words speaking to you. Don't forget to be around people who are there that know God and that are encouraging you and lifting you up to continue following in him, right? Because the second we forget, we turn away. We remember what we want and we turn away from what he wants. And that's exactly what they did. So now they're celebrating like the Passover feast of all Passover feasts. Like, this is the pinnacle, the be all end all. There's, thousands of sheep and rams and calves and bulls and everything. Like, they are, from morning until night, these guys are up there slaughtering the animals. And they even have like people stepping in and doing sacrifices for them so they can just keep doing sacrifices, right? Like, this was so much that they were going through. And it says they took this from all the king's possessions. So all the sacrifices they were taking were from the king's very own possessions. And this was much like what Solomon did back when Solomon, when the temple was first built. And then Solomon was celebrating the temple, and he brought in so many thousands of animals to sacrifice for everybody. So moving into this last little section here, it says, verse 18, the Passover had not been observed like this in Israel since the days of the prophet Samuel. And none of the kings of Israel had ever celebrated such a Passover as did Josiah, with the priests, the Levites, and all Judah and Israel who were there with the people of Jerusalem. This Passover was celebrated in the 18th year of Josiah's reign. So they're not saying it was never celebrated, but what they're saying is not like this. Like this, like bringing everybody together and doing thousands, like things haven't been celebrated like this since way back when, right? Now, could they be exaggerating a little bit? Because Solomon was after Samuel. Time of Samuel, maybe that's Solomon, maybe, right? They're kind of equating that with Solomon. But they're using big language to let you know that, like, this was a massive bring back to the Lord. This was a huge Passover celebration. All right, we're moving on to the prophet Nahum. So he is, and this got me a little bit, because this is a prophecy concerning Nineveh. And I was like, why does Nineveh matter? Jonah went to Nineveh. Is that why? Because they had turned to the Lord and now they turned away from the Lord? Nineveh's in Assyria. And so really it looks like it's an overall prophecy against Assyria, not just Nineveh. So we're prophesying some destruction on Nineveh. And it's because Assyria, Nineveh, has come against Judah. right? Obviously, they took out Israel, and then they kept butting heads up against Judah. And so God's like, okay, it's time. I'm done. I'm going to tear you down, right? And that's what this prophet is coming for. He's in Elkoshite, so he lives in Elkosh. And that is like up in Galilee. So again, I'm going to say this is a little bit north of the kingdom of Judah. So is he a prophet that's currently living under the reign of Assyria? It's likely, right? So it's likely he's under the reign of Assyria. He's living probably not very well. And so he prophesies, the Lord speaks to him. Verse 1, we say, a prophecy concerning Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. So God has given him a vision of what's going to happen to Nineveh. So we start out with talking about the Lord. And I love this visual because this visual is letting outsiders know who our God is. Don't mess with our God. Our God is pretty intimidating. Verse 2, the Lord is jealous and avenging. He takes vengeance on his foes. He's slow to anger, but great in power. He rebukes the sea and dries it up. Bashan and Carmel wither. Who can endure his fierce anger? His wrath is poured out like fire. This is a God who does not mess around. Verse 7, the Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. He cares for those who trust in him. The nation of Israel, all Israel. I know I say Israel sometimes. I mean Israel and Judah, all of Israel. Also, any foreigners at this point who choose to follow the one God. The Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. He cares for those who trust in him. But with an overwhelming flood, he will make an end of Nineveh. He will pursue his foes into the realm of darkness. Whatever they plot against the Lord, he will bring to an end. So they're plotting against the Lord. Plotting against the Lord's people is plotting against the Lord. It says in verse 11, from you, Nineveh, has one come forth who plots evil against the Lord and devises wicked plans. So, and he's like, you got a lot of allies and all this stuff that's working for you, but I can destroy all of them. So don't put anything into them. And then he says, no more will the wicked invade you, Israel. They're going to be completely destroyed. Moving on to Nahum 2, it says, an attacker advances against you, Nineveh. The Lord will restore the splendor of Jacob. So he's sending an attacker to Nineveh. He's restoring the splendor of Jacob. And now I'm not sure if this next sentence is a hint or verse 3, it says, the shields of the soldiers are red. The warriors are clad in scarlet. I'm feeling like, and then he says how he's going to destroy those things. They come with chariots and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if they're literally wearing red. So this would be guiding people to know that God sort of like spoke this prophecy like exactly like it is, right? Like, so they could be, their banner could be red. I'm not sure. It's something I actually didn't look up. Their banner could be red, or it could be that they're clothed in the blood of the people they destroyed, right? Like, so I think it could be either one of those things. Maybe it's both of those things. So, but it says that they're bringing all these things. None of it matters. They're all coming against Nineveh, right? Then Nineveh. So these people in red are coming against Nineveh, coming against with a strong army. Nineveh is then going to summon her troops, right? But they're going to stumble. So it's not going to wind up working out for Nineveh. Verse in Nineveh, it's decreed that Nineveh will be exiled and carried away. Everyone is mourning. And then in verse 11, it says, where now is the lion's den? They were so big and tough before. So where now? The place where they fed their young, where the lion and the lioness wet the cubs. Where is everybody? Moving down to Nahum 3, it says there's going to be many casualties, all because of the wanton lust of a prostitute, alluring the mistress of sorceries who enslaved nations by her witchcraft. Let's just say that. I've used that other word enough. And then the Lord says, I am against you. So when the Lord is against you, you're in trouble. She was taken captive, went into exile. And then it says in verse 11, you too, Nineveh, will become drunk. You will go into hiding and seek refuge from the enemy. And I'm sure Nineveh is probably thinking, none of this could possibly come true because they're such a big and strong nation. And so even as, Nahum's prophesying this, they're probably like, yeah, right. I'm sure that's going to happen. Moving on to verse 15, it says, the fire will consume you, the sword will cut you down. Verse 16, it says, you have increased the number of your merchants, but it doesn't matter. So like, even as big as you get, you can keep building up, you can keep adding more guards in, you can do all of these things, and none of it matters. Verse 18, King of Assyria, your shepherds slumber. Nothing can heal you. Your wound is fatal. And then he finishes up saying, all who hear the news about you clap their hands at your fall. So they were big and great once, and now everybody's happy that they're done. For who has not felt your endless cruelty? So they've been cruel to everybody, and so now people are happy that they're done. They're going to be destroyed. And then we're going to see what happens with Israel. And that's where we end today. It wasn't as short as I thought it was going to be, but it's not 30 minutes. So that's all good. Okay, guys, if you have stuck with me, I want you to like, share, subscribe to the channel. And if this has been a blessing to you, I want you to ring that bell for notifications so you get this every single day. Keep reading, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.